Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers, the podcast where we explore how behavior shapes leadership. I'm your host, Dr. Esther Bubb, and this episode is brought to you by Esther C. Bubb ABA Services. Today's conversation centers on how experience becomes influence and how each of us can create meaningful, sustainable change. I'm joined by Tori Perko, Director of Behavior Services and BCBA Coordinator of ABA Clinics. Tori's journey from graduate student navigating imposter syndrome to leading multi-site preschool ABA clinics and opening 3 programs in 1 year offers powerful lessons about purposeful leadership and human behavior. Let's dive in. So Tori, it's such a pleasure to see you today. I'm so happy that you are on the show with me today as a guest. How are you feeling coming into today's conversation, Tori?
I'm really excited. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You're one of my personal inspirations. So I'm really honored that you're having me here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. But before we dive into Tori, I do want to share this. I want to pause for a moment. It's really been a privilege knowing you, Tori. It's been a privilege having you in my class as a student, right? In my graduate class. I remember our very first phone conversation.
Me too.
Yeah. I will remember that every day, Tori. But, and then, working alongside you, I can't forget when you showed up for your interview. I was like, because the class was online. So it was my first time meeting you in person. And I feel like I've had a front row seat to your growth from since I met you, up to present. It's been remarkable, Tori. I have to tell you, I am very, very proud, incredibly proud of you, of your stick-to-itiveness, and your determination, right? And I want to say resilience and resolve, right? To be true to yourself, right? I want to say it that way. I'm proud of the leadership roles you're stepping into. I'm proud of the influence and impact you're already having on those who are, under your clinical care, but those whose paths you will continue to, those who you will continue to meet along the way. You show up to me, Tori, as someone who has courage, someone who's brave, someone who has integrity, and someone who just wants to do what's right. And then you also show up to me, Tori, as someone who's not afraid to ask questions and seek guidance, right? For your benefit, but for the benefit of others. So I want you to keep trusting your voice, keep trusting your instincts, your intuition. And I know you will go forward. I know you will impact and continue to shape many lives. So I just wanted to share that before we started.
I really appreciate that. There's, I don't know, this kind of philosophy or something that what you see in others is something that's inside of you as well. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. And I want to say likewise, that it has been a pleasure to have you as a mentor and someone who has followed me along this journey to be able to provide additional guidance or support or to even just kind of chat about what we're both going through. So I really appreciate those kind words and you seeing the growth that I've been able to have. It's been awesome to share that with you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's dive into, a little behavioral conversation here, right? So, Tori, from your perspective, so I also want to say that you're also a board certified behavior analyst, right, at this point. So from a behavioral lens, Tori, how would you define leadership? What does it mean to you as a behavior analyst?
And to me, I would say that quote that's about if the flower does not bloom in the environment that you have it in, you change the environment. So as a leader, bringing that principle, not just from the client, the learner, but bringing it then to the staff level and saying, okay, I want my staff to be performing by doing these tasks or, these expectations. How do I support them with the environment to succeed in that as well? And so that's been a big part of my journey is how do I adjust the environment to improve success and improve those client outcomes and staff ability to adhere to the expectations as well.
Yeah, I love that, Tori. So I believe I heard you say, I think it's the first time I've heard it phrased that way. If the flower doesn't bloom in the environment, you change the environment so that the flower will bloom. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's a strong statement, and I think it speaks a lot to you as a person, right? And to your belief in the ability of people to grow if we provide the right stimuli, but just the right environment for them, right? So saying all of that, Tori, what guides you and your leadership approach? Like, what values are most important to you, so that they show up daily in your work and anyone could just see them because you're so true to them?
Yeah, to me, there have been a few values that have been really important. I would say a huge one for me has been growth mindset for myself, for my staff, for the outcomes of the learners, just kind of like allowing that to trickle down, because if I'm expecting my learners to grow, if I'm expecting my staff to grow, I also need to grow as well along with them. And that has been a huge part of the journey, especially growing a program that was a little bit new. So to explain a little bit further, I opened 3 preschool clinics in 1 year. And so that was kind of a little bit of building the plane while you're flying it. And that meant that I had to really grow with the team as well. And they were all coming into something new. And I was also coming into something new. So it was all really working together. So in that, I also had to have the humility of, I don't know everything yet, and we're going to work it out together. And so that has really helped build this team approach together, which is you have a say in how this changes because I need your feedback to make this better as well.
Yeah, I love that, Tori. I really love growth mindset because, I'm really a firm believer in that, but then also humility. It's one thing to be making progress, right? And so we want to recognize ourselves and we want to pat ourselves on the back. And that's totally okay, but still remaining humble at the same time. So we don't lose focus. We don't lose sight of who we are and remain true to ourselves. So I really appreciate that. And thinking of you becoming a leader, right? From like training to now practicing, you studied behavior analysis. Then you completed ABA coursework at St. Joe's, some with me as professor. You worked in settings where ABA is like the guiding framework. And in one setting with me as your supervisor, we had lots of fun times.
We did.
We did, right? How did your journey lead you to behavior analysis, right? And how does it shape your leadership identity today, Tori?
I do love this question because this moves outside of the behavior analytic realm and more into that trusting the flow of your journey, I guess. Because for me, I feel that I had 2 guardian angels that led me into ABA that I didn't really expect to come here. I always knew I wanted to work with kids. I knew I wanted to lead in some capacity. And my stepdad connected me with one of my other mentors, who is Kathleen Stengel, who has run multiple ABA programs and changed my life by believing in me and giving me a job and like helping me get into the St. Joe's program when I really had no business being accepted. I didn't really have that much experience. I just knew, hey, I need to be a BCBA. It was more of this, I know I need to go for this goal and I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I'm going to figure it out as I go. So I had a little bit of imposter syndrome at the beginning because I was just dove in. My first day on the job was also my first day in school. So it was very interesting. I was very skeptical about working with kids with autism because I felt that was the biggest part of our field because I did go to St. Joe's and they do have the Kinney Center. So a lot of the psychology majors were in the Kinney Center and I thought, I want to do something different. I want to be in criminal justice and kind of mesh the two together. But then on my first day with the learner, that was another connection that I did not expect was going to change the course of my life, which was she changed my life, maybe even more than I changed hers by us teaching each other about the field. So that was how I got here in the first place. And it was really these synchronous moments that showed me this is where I'm supposed to be and helped me like build this giant energy inside of me to say ABA is the place that I need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. What an awesome story, Tori. As you were speaking, what was coming to my mind? So you remember before, the medical model was often referred to as wraparound, right? Now it's intensive behavioral health services. But the word wraparound came to mind because your community of people, family, mentor, and then client, wrap themselves around you, right? Not directly, but the combination of the three of them together, all of each of the individual impact help shape you and help convince you like this is what you want to do. So I really, really appreciate that story. It reminds me also, Tori, in our field, we talk a lot about families, right? And the importance of family and involvement. But look at how your stepdad was involved, right? So for you as a person, the impact of your family, and it just reminds me, and perhaps you too, of when we do the work that we do, we really want to make sure, family members are always involved. What are your thoughts on that, Tori?
I 100% agree. Family is really important to me. I love how you saw a big theme in that story, which is like all these different people played a role in my desire to be here, and family being that first touch point that drove me into it, which then became, aside from my own family being so important to me, a big part of my role of supporting families and connecting with their own kids in a way that's meaningful to them.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tori. So let's talk a little bit about behavioral principles. How do you believe they shape your leadership style? Because so for me as a behavior analyst, often I would be with my daughter, Michaela, implementing those principles, right? And sometimes I had to be like, all right, Esther, just lay low for a bit, But as leaders, we want to make sure in everything we do as much as possible that we're honoring those principles and implementing them, because we know, as Tori, I say it all the time, like ABA is just everyday living, right? You turn the corner and you see an example of a behavioral principle. So how do those principles shape your leadership style, Tori? And which ones would you say have had the greatest impact on how you lead?
I completely love how you even relate this to, your interactions with your daughter and wanting to shape her into the best human she can be. I will mention I recently adopted a dog.
Yay!
So his name is Remy.
Okay. Hi, Remy.
Remy is adorable. He's downstairs sleeping on the couch right now. And he is about 8 months. And so bringing him home has been fun as a behavior analyst to teach him. He knows all these tricks already. He knows lots of skills. It's been really fun. And so thinking about applying these principles, not only in the home, but obviously at work, it's very important. And so I would say one of the biggest ones that I want to take away from you as a supervisor and from my current supervisor now would be practicality, applied. The applied component of applied behavior analysis is one of the most important parts of our field, because if we are not looking at the practicality of what we do, what are we doing at all, right? I can teach a child how to label items, but if I'm teaching them how to label something that they're never going to use or see, what is that saying? And so trickling that down to always bringing that at the forefront as I'm coaching my staff and coaching those BHTs to look at the practicality and make sure that those plans do have that component of the family input and what they're really going to use and what can be generalized. So I would say that's number one. And number two, I would say, is modeling the expected behavior. So if I'm going to expect the staff to be able to do something, to be able to get in there, and I do have the ability to do that in my job. So that's really nice, where I can say, okay, if I'm going to expect my staff to try this new plan or to try to create their progress note at this time, I can come in and I can troubleshoot it with them. And if I can do it, I know that they can do it. And I can give them the tools to do it as well. And on a broader scale, just being there and modeling all of the expected behaviors that I have for them as well.
Yeah, I love that, Tori. The applied part. I love the word practicality that you used. And then modeling. For me, I think of shaping. I think of those successive approximations. And I think of, for me, just like you said, Tori, the growth mindset, but helping people get from where they are to where they could be, but like baby steps. It might seem like a mountain to them. It might seem like something they can't do, but like the small wins.
Absolutely.
And then you contact the reinforcement and then you're motivated, to keep going. So I like to be able to push people and support people as long as they're willing to, to move from where they are to where they could be. So that for me, I would say is one of those things, because for me, Tori, one of the things that I'm very strict about not supporting is learned helplessness.
Absolutely.
Right. So the more I can shape your behavior to do these things, and then you contact the reinforcement contingency. So now you're motivated and you're reinforced to continue. So for me, I really like to be able to focus on shaping. And honestly, Tori, I feel like I do that more than reinforcement. Not that it's a good or bad thing, right? But yeah, to me, I feel like in those conversations, it's like helping people and encouraging them, just give it a try, and it's okay. If maybe the first time you miss, but keep trying. So
exactly.
That's what I would say for me. Yeah.
I completely agree. And I have noticed that in my early stages of being a leader, especially with a team under me, one thing that we have to learn as leaders is we can't do everything that they're doing, that they're supposed to be doing. We can't take on work for them, because that is a huge experience that we have as leaders, is our staff come to us and say, oh, I'm missing the deadline, I need help. And for me as a helper and as a person who is used to writing plans, the first year was really, okay, I can pick this one up for you. I can do this for you. And then I like how you said, no learned helplessness. So this year has been a lot more about how do I connect them with the resources they need to be successful. So whether it's that SharePoint that has all of the things that they need to be successful, and when they ask those questions, reminding them that that's where they can find it as well.
Exactly. I love that. I love to hear that, Tori. It warms my heart. How do you, Tori, so kind of going off what you just said, but how do you balance authority, right, with approachability? It's such a critical balance. Well, there are so many things. Let's just start us off, as there are so many things, as behavior analysts or as professionals or leaders that we have to balance. But one of those core things, two of those core things we have to balance is authority. We have to meet this deadline. We have to remain compliant. We have to follow this policy, this procedure, things like that, but still being approachable, right? In how you convey the message. How do you balance those two?
That's a great question. And I did prepare an answer. However, I think I want to deviate from it a little, because one thing that is coming to mind from what we were just discussing is when a staff member is having a tough time with something, really being there to listen and to hear them out and to really be that safe space for them to actually first share the problem. Because if you're not hearing from your staff what the problem is, you can't support them with it. So I really strive to make sure that they feel comfortable sharing their challenges with me and provide a lot of opportunities for them to give me feedback. But then also from that grander scale of, I'm a little bit more removed from the one-on-one staff because I'm not with them on a daily basis, but being able to be on site with them and training them. One of the best parts of my job is I actually get to develop trainings that are specific to their needs. And so bringing them on site together and providing additional training for some of the things that they've specifically shared with me have been a challenge, has been a really rewarding way to balance those two of, I have to have some level of accountability because we do have expectations of the job. And when you share with me that, this is a challenge, then I can work with whatever tools I have to support you to then further give you those tools that you need to be successful.
Yeah, I really love that. And I love how we are just like conversing, in the moment and sort of responding authentically to the question. So I appreciate that you're sharing your deviation. I'm just going with your instinct and your inspiration. If you, Tori, right, had to identify just one behavior that every single leader should intentionally model every day, which one would you choose, and why would you choose it?
I would say, for me, really this is what I would like to share, would be being person first. So really connecting with your staff, connecting with the children that you work with, and really meeting them where they're at is so important, because you're going to get a variety of level of productivity from your staff, depending on what's going on in their lives, depending on how motivated they are, and really taking the time to understand them and to make them feel like you have a connection that's not just, oh, I need you to do this job for me. That's more about, I see you, I see the value that you provide, and I see that there's more to you than just this job. I personally believe that really drives buy-in and better quality of work as well. So that's what I would share as the number one thing we should utilize.
So being present, meeting them where they are. And I feel like I also heard you say, really getting to know them, right? So you're able to build that relationship, establish that connection. One of the things I do, Tori, and I would have done it with you too, but when I meet staff for the first time, it's like a sort of get to know you. So I have questions that I ask. So one of the things is, what's fun for you outside of work? Things like that. And where do they want to go? What are their goals and aspirations, things like that. But just to kind of have a conversation to get to know them. So I totally agree with that. The other thing I heard you say previously is the word listen. And in all of the episodes I've done so far, that word came up from every single guest. And I think it's so critical. You mentioned it indirectly as, something leaders should do every day, but I think it's a core thing. And especially listening to hear is a theme that has been coming up, as opposed to listening to respond. So thank you for sharing that. I think if you listen, you're present, you build a connection, as you're saying, then you're able, going back to the previous question, to remain approachable, right? Because you're building that trusting, caring, open, honest relationship. So in light of everything we've talked about so far, Tori, what leadership lessons have you learned from, both supervising clinicians, teams, from supervisors, or just from being supervised yourself? Which ones would you say resonate with you the most?
I would say that as a leader, I've had to learn the hard truth that there's always going to be fires and challenges, and that is not easy. However, that's our job. So it's easy to get really emotionally connected when there are fires and challenges, and take a lot of that weight onto your shoulders and say, what did I do that caused this to happen, right? And so oftentimes those situations are the ones that help us grow the most. And so not only learning how to grow from them, but how to understand that this is a normal part of the job, and to be able to then take a little bit more of a deep breath and not have such an emotional reaction to those. So for me, that's been a huge lesson, is not necessarily bracing myself, but saying, okay, this happens. We can learn from it. We can have additional training. And in the future, I'm going to make sure that my staff know about this when I bring on someone new, or, that everybody is aware of whatever changes need to come from a fire that might happen. And I would say, from being supervised myself, I have worked best with supervisors who are really encouraging. Obviously, you want to feel like you're doing a good job and that you're making a difference and that you're having success with what you're doing. And so modeling from those supervisors down to my staff, really being compassionate with them, understanding where they are, what challenges they're struggling with and facing, but then also saying, I see you, you're doing a great job, and really making sure to emphasize and highlight those areas that they are excelling at, so that they can feel like they can build on that too, especially because there's always things to learn and grow from. And if we weren't doing that, then we wouldn't be moving to the next level.
Yeah.
So really having that encouragement along the way.
Yeah, thank you. So if I had to pull two principles or, behavior analytic strategies from what you said, I heard self-management. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because you talked about, not taking things personally, but just knowing, it comes with the territory. It comes with what we're going to have those experiences.
Absolutely.
But simply encouraging people is reinforcing them. Yeah. So you can see how just naturally, and that's why we went back to you use the word practicality, which I like, the applied component, but it's just in what we do anyway. It's just what is the behavioral, or the behavior analytic term for that. So I appreciate you sharing that, but the word encouragement stood out to me because sometimes it's hard in the moment because of everything that's going on to be encouraging. But like you said, Tori, we just have to find a way, like the self-talk, right? So how are we going to support ourselves through that? Encouraging ourselves too, Tori, right? So encouraging others, but encouraging ourselves, but that also others are encouraging us, right? Because as supervisors or leaders, sometimes it's often missed that we're humans too. Right. So we're giving it out, but we also need to be receiving it. And so that's why staying in touch like we do, or conversations like these, it sort of just encourages us in the moment without us even thinking about it. And then it just helps us grow and learn along the way. So
I completely agree. And I appreciate you doing this series and having this podcast because it is much needed. Leaders do need support. And they need encouragement. So kudos to you.
Thank you, Tori. So let's talk a little bit about ethics. As professionals, any professional field, there's always a code of ethics. How do, your own values, your norms, your morals, your professional and your behavioral ethics, how do they guide your leadership decision-making?
A huge component to this for me is at the end of the day, we're responsible to deliver high quality care to the children that we serve. And so a lot of the work that I do to support my staff is how can we connect our families to that, even if it's with us? How can we make sure that our goals that we're setting for our learners are at that high quality standard, but then also if they need supports outside of what we can provide for ABA, how can I help connect them with that as well? So sometimes what happens is we get staff or a situation where there are family dynamic challenges and sometimes staff will say, well, is this really in the ABA realm? And so it's kind of helping them balance. Yes, we can, continue to support behavior change for more complex learners, but we may also need to bring in other supports as well. That's what I would say has been maybe the main theme that's been coming up recently.
Wonderful. I love to hear that. And with saying all of that, Tori, how do you balance? So as you know, I'm very big on compassion, compassion for the individuals we work with, compassion for whoever, regardless of their characteristics, their abilities, whoever we work with, whoever we support, being compassionate, right? In the midst of whatever is occurring. But how do you balance that on that topic of balance again, Tori, with accountability? Like, okay, the person did this or didn't do this. I need to follow up. But I want to present it, in a respectful, compassionate manner. How do you balance that?
Absolutely. It really comes down to kind of what we were talking about with that encouragement and that supporting them with the tools that they need to move forward. So a huge part for me that I actually would say is compassion and that accountability, maybe even wrapped up into one, is trying to identify what barriers they're facing and support them with overcoming it. Because that compassion piece comes from, well, what's stopping you from being able to do the expected behavior? And then that accountability piece is, well, if we change this part of what's stopping it, let's try moving forward. And if that doesn't work, that's okay, but let's try again and let's adjust, because where there's a will, there's a way. So I would say main part of my job is problem solving. I have the problem solving hat on all the time. And that piece is a main component of what I've been doing.
Yeah, I love that, Tori. Especially the fact that you mentioned there's some level of responsibility on you too, as the leader, Tori, on me as the leader or the supervisor, on anyone who is in any of these positions to support those that we work with. So going back to when we talked about when I meet staff for the first time, I just have like a chit chat. One of the questions that I ask is, what are barriers you're facing that I need to be aware of, that I can support you with? But also even in the evaluative process, right, for educators, and we're going through their annual evaluation, I often say to them, if at the end of the year you're having to be given a needs improvement or failing, that also speaks on me, because that means one of two things, Tori. Either I never took the time to identify what are the barriers, just like you're saying, Tori, what are the things you need, right? Whether it's a resource, whether it's a skill to help you do your job, and I didn't provide that, or at least I've done that due diligence, right? So then there's some other barrier that's beyond me that needs to be addressed. So I really like that you brought that up, because I believe it's our responsibility as supervisors, as leaders, to help support those that we're leading so that they can continue to move forward. And I think it's prudent, like you're saying, Tori, that we ask those questions and identify them, because sometimes they won't say them because for fear, or they're not sure what the response is going to be. And it could be from, maybe we're new and they're just not sure, maybe past experiences they've had along the way. So that, Tori, it was just a phenomenal response, because often that's just missed, and we think of, the old methods of writing people up, but not even trying to figure out why this thing happened to begin with, right? So I really appreciated that you shared that.
Absolutely. And you reminded me while you were also talking about, I did go through a leadership course over the fall, and one of the, I guess, like a philosophy maybe that they shared was asking why 5 times. And when you've gotten to that 5th why, that's when you get to the bottom of the problem, so that you can really support with a solution.
Yeah, I love that. That's really deep. So the first response, might just be the surface, and we need to keep digging. Thank you for sharing that. So Tori, I know purpose is something that's really important for you, and I know you're really committed to your purpose, right? And living that purpose daily. How do you stay aligned? And the reason I'm asking this question, Tori, is because as leaders, and even in our field, right, we're faced with challenges daily, right? They're going to happen. As you said, we just know it comes with territory, or regardless, just life period, Tori. We're going to be faced with challenges, but we have to be able to hold true to what, like you said earlier, your guiding values, or your purpose, or your principles. So how do you stay aligned with your purpose, Tori, despite challenging moments that you may be faced with?
That's a great question. And I love that you asked it, because for me personally, I would say that my purpose is something that I come back to, especially when I find that I'm experiencing more challenges in the position. And it's always what ends up motivating me back to, okay, this is something I can work through. This is something I can support for my staff. And so I would say in my current role, I have a very specific purpose that is really awesome. And it is that I get to provide services to kids that wouldn't necessarily have had this opportunity before. So, bringing it back to that why of, well, if I didn't have this program, these kids would likely be at home, not receiving these services. And that really motivates me. So coming back to that and being able to remember that this is why we're here, it really does give me that motivation to come back with even more oomph. Every time I have one of those moments where I'm like, I need to get back to my purpose. Let me think about this. Let me get there. It is what gives me that glow and that drive that I hope to trickle and inspire the rest of my team to feel that as well.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Did I answer your whole question?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
good.
good.
Absolutely. Like your purpose, it's like the students, receiving services, for example, that they wouldn't have received. So despite whatever happens, that motivates you. That's your purpose, and that keeps you going.
Absolutely.
So, absolutely. Is there, Tori, a mistake or a challenge, so kind of staying on that topic, but shifting it a little bit, that shaped your growth, right? That you're willing to share with leaders, one that's meaningful to you, or one that you might say has had the most impact on who you are today as a person, as a professional, as a leader?
That's also a great question. I have a few challenges, I would say. For me, one of the biggest things that we already kind of discussed was that lesson that I needed to learn about there's always going to be a fire that happens. And it's my responsibility to be prepared to take a deep breath and to create action steps for what we need to do to resolve that challenge that's going on. And so not taking it so much on mentally and emotionally. And even if I am like using coping strategies for myself and having that work-life balance to be able to be a better supervisor for my team and be able to, you know, just emotionally regulate myself to support the group.
Yeah, I love that, Tori. And I can tell you, just because we work together, you know, we've shared so many experiences, but where I think we're both at a point in our lives, Tori, personally and professionally, where we value and we intentionally take steps to ensure we have some level of work-life balance, because we both come from times in our lives and in our professional experiences, right? And due to factors such as you learn as you grow, right? And you learn with time, where the work, you know, took more precedence than life. And so as I get older, but as I get older in life and in work and, you know, profession and things like that, I'm giving more value to that. It's something I'm really focusing a lot more. It's something I'm doing intentionally, making sure I'm giving myself breaks, but making sure, say, for example, on the weekends, I come home, work laptop is closed, you know, things like that, because we have to be able to take care of ourselves and maintain ourselves, pour into ourselves. But I believe also, Tori, that's part of how we are and could remain resilient, is because we take care of ourselves. If we're not taking care of ourselves, even if we just use the analogy of being sick, right? It's hard to be resilient in a particular situation if you're sick and you're down, right? But if you're strong and healthy and, you know, emotionally, mentally, physically, that in and of itself, you know, just helps you, at least you have the starting point, right, to bounce back, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It does. It completely makes sense. And I also am thinking about something I learned this week. Actually, I listened to a leadership CEU like credit from LIBA this year. It was their like leadership panel. And one of the leaders shared that they don't answer every email, and something about, you know, obviously when they're out of work, they're not necessarily responding. And I thought it was a very interesting response how she shared that she doesn't get to every email. And her explanation was that a lot of the challenges or questions that people are sharing in the emails, they get resolved on their own. And I thought that was so interesting because it actually reminded me of my relationship with my supervisor, because she doesn't always answer every single email. And oftentimes some of those situations do get resolved on their own. And I was like, what a very interesting, almost counterintuitive strategy, which is, you know, sometimes you have to delegate to the ether. I don't know. Maybe delegate to give it time to also support yourself as well, to say, you know, I can't, because I mean, if you're getting bombarded with questions all day, you can't answer every single one. That it comes back to that learned helplessness, like anti-learned helplessness, which is, you know, helping give your staff more of that empowerment to find some, not all, obviously, but some of the answers independently, because that is possible. So here's my take on that, Tori. I absolutely agree with that. What I would add, though, I'm going back to the word balance, and I'm going to add the word transparency. I think it's important. So like, for example, as I said, like when I meet with staff, I tell them a lot about my philosophy, my approach, even in the evaluation process, because each supervisor is different. I say, this is my approach to the evaluation process, so they are aware. I think it's critical, because the flip side of that is I often hear staff say, well, this person doesn't respond, right? They never respond. I think it's critical to define that and explain, this is my approach, so people are aware. Because the flip side of that is you get labeled as, and I've seen it happen to several supervisors or leaders, as they never respond, so I'm never going to go to them. So I think it's critical that we're defining and we're explaining and we're being transparent about what our approach is, and we're sharing that.
that's something I value deeply, because I want people to understand this is my approach, and that's just me as a person. And particularly for the evaluative process, I really explain that. So one of the things I take time to do, Tori, is I explain when you might get a distinguished from me and when you might get a proficient. Like, I explain that. So there's no question. I'll say, if I have to give you a distinguished, I must have evidence. I need that in order to, so that they understand. And I say, well, here are some ways you can produce evidence, right? So they have that awareness. Then again, to me, it's building that relationship and that trust. And I totally agree with that. Not responding to but just making sure that people are aware, this is your approach, because the flip happens really easily where you become labeled as, you plural, as a non-responsive, supervisor, or barely responds. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree with that. And I was in a situation where I felt that my supervisor was not, the term that's coming to mind is really that transparency and clarity in what to expect. And that really eases a lot of people's minds, I would say, when you're a supervisor, because if they know what to expect from you, then your contingencies are clear every time, right? Yeah. Especially like being consistent is very important. And so I think that's a really, really valuable add, because in my experience, I had a supervisor who was shaping my behavior, but wasn't really exactly telling me what was happening. And I would have really appreciated that transparency, which is, I see an area of growth for you. I would like you to be at Z, but you're at A right now. So I'm going to slowly increase the expectation over time versus when it was happening. Like, for example, I would get reports back with edits, and I would have new edits when I thought that I changed everything last time. And I'd be like, what's going on? I would feel like a failure. And if I wouldn't have felt so much like a failure if I had more of that transparency. So I completely agree from own personal experience, but also from projecting how if I from this week changed my behavior based on what I heard, my staff might be thinking, whoa, what just happened? Because Tori used to be very responsive and now she's responding a little bit less.
Yes.
So that transparency is a great add.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I feel like in that response, I heard you talk about growing, right? And developing as a leader. How do you then, Tori, we talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of the growth mindset, but if we can just get more specific for a bit, how do you intentionally grow and develop future leaders within your teams and organization? For me, Tori, my phrase is train to replace, and even I say it all the time, and my staff will be like, wait, are you leaving? No. The concept here is that so that you can do it too, so that you can move into something similar, or if I'm not here, the program is still going to run, because every member of my team knows what to do, or can take on some level of responsibility. How do you intentionally shape and build teams like that?
That is also a great question. The cool thing about my current position is because our behavior analysts are functioning almost like as managers, really, to their team that they have on site. It is an area of growth for them, typically from the beginning, because they're used to either going out to the home and community, or like their team having another supervisor that really takes care of a lot of those challenging conversations. And so one big area that I've been supporting with growing for them has been how to have those tough conversations in a way that also makes them closer to their current team, and how to create that team bond within the team that they have, and work with them on what are your professional development goals, and really use that along with what I observe from them as what their areas of growth to really combine it and support them with their team moving forward. So
yeah, I love that. It makes me think, Tori, of building leaders at every level. There's this book that I read with my former leadership group. This was years ago. It's called Turning the Ship Around by David Marquette. It's based on a true story. He was the captain of a ship, but he was able to turn the ship around, figuratively speaking, by shifting the leadership approach from leader follower to leader, where every person saw themselves as a leader and, taking responsibility. So what you said, just really reminded me of that, where across the team, across the board, regardless of our position or title, we're shaping leaders and we're encouraging, like you said, Tori, everyone to see and helping them believe that they can be a leader, in whatever it is that they're doing. So even if they're in the classroom supporting a child, be a leader, like step up, like active supervision, getting on the floor and engaging, things like that, right? So leading in your role.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I appreciated you sharing that.
Of course.
Thank you. So let's keep moving on, Tori. So you're big on this, but I'm also big on this too, is the fact that behavior analysis is not just limited to education or psychology or, mental health, for example. How can us as behavior analysts inform leadership beyond traditional ABA settings and into broader systems? Allow me to share with you an excerpt from an article. So and I'm just going to read it. In a 2025 article in the Behavior Academy, was titled Embracing Your Sphere of Influence, a Behavior Analyst Guide to Transforming Society Through Applied Behavior Analysis. So this was written by Ryan O'Donnell, and he wrote, real and lasting change comes from embracing a contextual and multidisciplinary mindset, actively expanding our sphere of influence through intentional integration of complementary fields. Your journey into behavior analysis, could and should encompass whatever areas ignite your passion and address your specific professional context. So whether it's law, whether it's technology, education, healthcare, or any field that meaningfully aligns with your goals. Expanding your sphere of influence involves more than just acquiring new ways of thinking. It also requires building the skill sets, experience, and resources necessary to implement that knowledge effectively. So how do we, Tori, push behavior analysis away from just this idea that it's education, it's mental health, but it could be embedded and embraced in any field, any part of society that aligns with our purpose or vision, what it is we want to do, what's meaningful to us?
I love this question. And when you think about behavior analysis, I mean, a lot of people do put it into that educational, maybe even that healthcare type of mindset, because a lot of what we do often is serving kids, young adults, people with disabilities. However, our field really is behavior change. And that is not just really pigeonholed into that education, disability area, right? So it's really in any profession, what behavior do you want to change and how do you get there? So one way I would say ABA can really impact way beyond just where we are today would be to help other fields, other industries really get better at identifying what skill sets they do want their team to know and what holes there are, right? We do for, our kids, we might do a functional assessment and we might do a skills-based assessment, but really developing those tools for the workforce, for any behavior that needs to be changed can be made like really, really valuable to any industry at all. I would say anywhere there's behavior, there's room for behavior analysis.
Yeah, I love it. The episode I published last week included, she's my colleague from Grenada, but also friend, but her focus is on agriculture. So her PhD is in agriculture, but we were talking about, alignment between behavior analysis and her fields, thinking of change in farming and healthy eating behaviors, things like that. It's all about behavior change. So how can behavior analysts and agriculturists collaborate, to expand that field? So thank you for sharing that. So for Tori, people who might be listening, people you interact with, students in college, anyone who might be aspiring to become a BCBA or is a rising BCBA wanting to expand their influence, what would you say to them?
I would say if they want to expand their influence, that really coming back to that theme that we talked about of practicality, right? The more practical you are, the more influential you're going to be, right?
True.
Because that's where you get that buy-in and that's where you get, that behavior change from those who really need it, right? Whether it's the parents, whether it's the teacher, whether it's another caregiver, or even the child, or the adult, or if we're expanding outside of just the ABA typical industry, right? The more practical you can be, the more value that you hold, because you're going to give them something that's meaningful to them, that they're more likely going to utilize on a long-term basis.
I love that, Tori. I couldn't say it any better.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. On that note, let's close us off, Tori. What are 3 leadership takeaways or behaviors you would want anyone listening to be able to walk away with ready to practice?
I would really hope that being practical would be one that they can take away. So if you didn't hear anything, be more practical.
Yeah.
I would say when things get tough, remember your why and get back to that, your purpose.
Yeah.
And always be a student, always be a listener, because there is always room for growth.
I love that. I love that. Practicality, right? The second one was remembering your purpose, or asking why, your why, remembering your why. And the third one was always being ready to learn. Curiosity. Yes? Yes.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Tori, it's always a pleasure. It definitely was a pleasure talking to you today. The one thing I say in every episode is I always learn from the conversation. So that's why doing this is also so motivating and reinforcing to me, Tori, because it's just an honest, open conversation. And I learn a lot, and I believe the guests also learn a lot, and listeners, have been saying they're learning. So I really appreciate you joining and allowing me to learn from you. And I like the one thing that still resonated in my head is asking why 5 times. Yeah. So I love that. And then also not necessarily responding to every email. So I love that too. Yeah. But thank you so much. You're an inspiration. You know that, but I'm going to say it out loud. And like I said, I'm very proud of you, and I know you'll do great. Stay focused, stay committed, and, always remain focused on giving back. Right. So yes, you're benefiting, but how are you also benefiting others? Thank you for joining.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Esther. You're an inspiration to me as well. And I've appreciated all the lessons I've learned and will continue to learn alongside and from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Behaviorally Speaking, Leadership for Changemakers. And Tori, thank you for sharing your experiences on today's episode. As we close, I want to leave you with this reflection. Leadership lives in our daily behavior, in how we listen, how we respond, and how we create space for others to grow. And as Tori reminded us, if the flower doesn't bloom, change the environment. If you have a story about leadership and behavior from your community, share your story with us. If this episode resonated, share it with someone. For training, coaching, and behavior-based leadership support, visit esthercbubbabaservices.com. And check out the companion blog, Behaviorally Speaking, Insights for Changemakers, at esthercbubbabaservices.com/blog. Until next time, lead with humanity and purpose, practice with compassion and intention, and create meaningful, lasting change. This is Dr. Bubb. Stay inspired.